Do you want to implement native Google login in your Flutter app like this? Hi, in this video, I'm going to take you through how to set up native Google login in your Flutter app using Supabase auth. We are going to create a simple application using Flutter. Note that I'm using a Flutter version 3.10.5, so if you do use a different version or any of the different versions for the libraries that's used within this video, you might encounter some problems, but the general steps should be the same. I have gone ahead and created a simple application with a button in the middle. It doesn't have anything within the onPress callback, so we'll be implementing that later. The app doesn't really have anything else other than minimal styling. We can get started by heading over to Supabase Flutter's pub.dev page, which we'll be installing later on. And in here, we can find an instruction of how to get started with authentication, including native Google login. Down here, we have some code snippets that we can copy and paste later on, but let's get started by installing Supabase Flutter in our Flutter application. I'm just gonna take this and paste it into pubspec.yaml file. And let's look at a few other dependencies. Flutter app auth takes care of handling authentication screens. And then crypto library takes care of encryptions of nuns, which I'll explain later. Now after adding all the dependencies in our pubspec.yaml file, there's some additional configuration that we need to do with the Flutter app auth. We can go back to the Flutter app auth page and we can scroll all the way down to the Android setup section. There are instructions for iOS and macOS, but we can actually skip this. All we need to do is we just need to copy and paste this section into the build.gradle file, just like this, and we can actually change this to be the application ID. This application ID variable actually comes from the line 48 application ID variable, and you should confirm that your application IDs is set properly here. And that is it for installing dependencies. Now that we have all the dependencies installed, let's go back to the Supabase Flutter pub.dev page and read the rest of the instructions of how to set up native Google auth. And we can see that we need to register an Android and iOS client ID with Google. So let's head over to Google Cloud Console and do just that. Now, once you have set up your Google Cloud project, you can search credentials on the search bar and head over to APIs and services and under the credentials menu. Now, before we get started with creating credentials, for the first time when you land here, you have to create a OAuth consent screen. Now I've already done that, so I'm gonna skip that screen. And let's create our credentials. We can hit create credentials and click OAuth client ID. Now first, let's get started with iOS client ID. And then all we need to provide is the bundle ID of the application. Now, in a production app, you most likely have App Store ID and Team ID, but I'm just gonna skip this, but feel free to fill it in if you do have one. Now, once you see this dialog, you don't really need to do anything. You just can hit OK, and we'll copy the client ID later on. Now, similarly, let's create our Android client ID. Just select Android and give it the package name of our app, and we also need to provide a SHA-1 certificate fingerprint. We can open up terminal to get our SHA-1 certificate fingerprint. So open the terminal and run the command that's provided in the instructions. Here you should specify your path to the debug key store. In my case, it's this, and we can hit enter and enter the password. I'm just gonna hide this section, but you can copy the SHA-1 certificate right there and paste it into the Google Cloud Console. Now you can hit create. Now once the client ID is created, we can just hit OK to close the dialog, and we are good to go. Now let's head over to our Supabase project. If you don't have a Supabase project yet, you can create one at database.new. Open the authentication menu and click providers. Now scroll down to Google and first enable it. Now we can copy over the two client IDs, so copy the first one and paste it into authorized client IDs. and then copy the second one, and we can pass a comma separated strings here. So hit comma and paste the second one, and we should be able to hit save at this point, and that is it. Now lastly, let's connect this Supabase project to our Flutter application. So go back to Supabase Flutter page and scroll all the way up to copy this sample initialization code. We're just gonna paste this into our main function and copy over the URL and add key. Go back to our Supabase dashboard, go to Settings, API, and we can get the Supabase URL at the top and then add key right below it. Now this one's optional, but I always like to keep a Supabase variable right below the main function for easy access to our Supabase client. And that should be all the setup that we need. I think we are ready to copy and paste the sample code down here for Google sign-in into our onPress callback. So I'm just gonna take this piece of code and paste it right here above the build method. So let's do some cleanup here. First, we don't need these two imports, and then we are going to use the quick fix feature of VS Code to import a bunch of these libraries. So import here, import there. Now what we're doing here is we are creating a nonce, which is just a random string, and then we are hashing that nonce. These values later on help Supabase verify the integrity of the ID token passed from Google. Another import down here. And we have an await keyword, so we have to make this function async. And we're missing the appauth variable, so we can initialize it right here. It'll be just Flutter appauth. Now here, essentially what we're doing is we are requesting Google's ID token with the help of Flutter appauth library. And once we obtain a ID token, we just pass it to Supabase auth sign in with ID token method. Now we can go down to the onPress callback and modify this to be the function name is sign in with Google, and I think we can even get rid of these parentheses and make it look simpler. And I think we are ready to test this out, except I forgot two things to do here. So first, we need to update our application ID here. So our application ID can be found in the build.gradle file. I'm just gonna update it to this one, which is my application ID, and get rid of the to-do. And then similarly, we need to update the client ID variable, so we can copy and paste the client ID from Google Cloud Console. Now we have two client IDs here, one for iOS and one for Android. So I just took the iOS client ID, and we are going to use the platform.isIOS variable to check if the current platform is iOS, and if it's iOS, I'm gonna pass the iOS client ID. If it's not, I'm gonna pass the Android client ID. Looks like this, looks good, and I can get rid of the to-do comment here, and I think we are ready. Let's try this one out. So we can hit the sign in with Google button. It opens up a dialog, and I just choose my account, and just like that, I'm signed in, except there's no user feedback. I totally forgot about that, so let's just quickly add something that tells us that the user is logged in. We can check the supabase.auth current user variable and see if it's null or not, and if it's not null, we're just gonna print the content of the current user. And once we do a hot reload, we should see the content of our user object on the screen. Great! iOS is working fine. Now let's try out Android as well. Now I've opened my Android simulator and I've tried to run the code, and I got this error, and it says I need to update my minimal SDK version to at least 19. Now in order to publish your app on the Play Store, you, I believe, need at least SDK version 20 or 21, so normally you shouldn't even encounter this error. But I just upgraded my minimal SDK version to 19 and tried to run the app again. And hopefully it works this time. And there you go, we have our beautiful app. I can click Google Sign In. And I see this dialog. I can just click my account and we are signed in. Great, we got native Google login working both on Android and iOS. We can head over to our Supabase dashboard to quickly confirm that our authenticated user is in fact created right here. Amazing work, guys! Thanks for watching, and I'll see you with more Flutter and Supabase content.